what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I've got a couple of interesting stories for you guys today. The first story that I've got for you guys today, as we get very close now to the Cali Pro, which at this point is tomorrow, we got a couple new updates from Regan Grimes. He was on the Cutler cast. He did some posing for Jay and Matt and Milos, and I thought he looked pretty good in these updates. He's still my pick to win this show. I think he is the favorite going into this show based on his performance in New York. And I actually just got done watching Tyler Mannion's recap of the New York Pro from this past weekend. And Tyler basically said kind of the same things that I said in my recap of the show, was that Regan and Krizo were very close, third and fourth. Obviously with Nick and Bonac, Tyler didn't think it was very close. There was only one pose that he thought was kind of a toss-up, and that was the front lat split. So I was mainly watching for the critique of Regan, because it applies going into Cali. And he said that really the big one was that Regan was sweating a lot during prejudging, and he was fading a lot during prejudging. And the other big thing that Tyler mentioned in this video was that Regan still lacks a little bit of size overall, and that could be an issue for Regan going into Cali as well. But especially compared to Krizo, I think the lack of size is a little bit more evident in that situation. But it was kind of what I thought. And I still kind of hold the opinion with Regan, it might just be a thing where he hasn't competed in a while. He's not used to competing as frequently as he used to. And maybe he was just a little bit rusty getting back on stage here and doing this New York show. And that could be the reason for this sweating and for him fading. And I hope that is the case. And I hope that he improves that for Cali. And I think if he does, that's what makes him the favorite to win. Because really, I don't really remember this being an issue for Regan. The profuse sweating on stage, him fading like really drastically during the prejudging. The size thing has kind of always been a comment that people have made. That's kind of been the main criticism towards Regan, is that, in lineups like the Olympia where you have these bigger guys, he does look a little bit smaller next to them. Because of his height, he's got kind of a more narrow frame. He kind of has like this slender look when he's next to stockier guys with wider clavicles that are just thicker overall. Because of his height, his frame's a little bit harder to fill out. And that was kind of Tyler's other main critique. I kind of feel like the sweating thing, the fading thing is not going to be something that Regan struggles with going forward, because it's not something I really remember him having an issue with before, and I think he's just a little bit rusty. So I think if he's able to fix that for the Cali show, I think it's going to be between him and Sauce Harati. We haven't had a new update from Sauce yet this week, but I do think Regan is the favorite going into this show. I'm kind of curious to see how Patrick Moore is going to look here. We got an update recently as well from Leandro Perez. I thought Leandro looked fantastic in this update. And Leandro might be an interesting guy here as well. I still think Sauce will be the more likely guy to be vying for a top 2 spot. But Leandro skipped New York. We obviously saw him at the Arnold Classic South America against Good Vito, where he was runner-up. But most recently, he did do the Pittsburgh Pro, which you could argue was a more competitive lineup for sure than the New York show. And he was top 6 in Pittsburgh, so we didn't get to see what Leandro versus Regan would look like. Regan being 4th in New York, Leandro being 6th in Pittsburgh. We didn't see Regan in Pittsburgh, didn't see Leandro in New York. So that could be an interesting comparison as well. I mean, Leandro could be, vying for a top 2 spot here also. Because like I said, you could make a strong argument that the Pittsburgh Pro was much more competitive than the New York show. Just off the two guys, off the top of my head alone, Derek Lunsford and Martin Fitzwater not being in the New York lineup would be 2 placings, which had they been in New York, that probably would have pushed Regan to 6th. So probably in a pretty comparable range with where Leandro landed in Pittsburgh. And like I said, maybe Patrick can surprise us here, but I still kind of think Regan and Sauce are the main 2 guys that I'm looking at as the favorites. And, consideration for Leandro as well. Those are kind of the 3 names that really stand out to me. Bruno Santos, I think he's pretty good as well. I believe he qualified for the Olympia last year, so he did win a show last year. Justin Musial, he's pretty good. Felix Norman, but as far as the top 3, I'm really looking at Regan, Sauce, and Leandro here, especially considering the Pittsburgh Pro lineup, how deep that was. Top 6 at that show. Not an easy placing to achieve, in a lineup where you've got Derek Lunsford, Nick Walker, Martin Fitzwater, William Bonac, Michael Krizo. So that was a pretty good placing for him, and I'm thinking about that as being, maybe he will be in the top 3 here in Cali. So I think this Cali Pro is definitely going to be an interesting show, and no matter what happens, there will be a new name added to the Olympia qualified competitor list after this weekend, so that's always exciting. Now, next up in the news, Michael Krizo recently confirmed that it looks like he's going to be sitting out this year's Mr. Olympia. So obviously he hasn't qualified yet. He hasn't won a pro show this year. He doesn't have his Olympia qualification, and he announced that he's not going to be competing again this year until the Prague Pro, which is actually after the Mr. Olympia. So I was kind of disappointed to see that. I think Krizo would likely be within that top 10 again this year at the Olympia were he able to qualify. But it looks like he has a sight set on Prague, and he's going to be waiting until 2026 Olympia, assuming he's able to win the Prague show and then be able to get that early qualification for 2026. But he also did say in the video that a core focus for that Prague show, and probably the reason for the gap between New York and Prague, is he really wants to work on his posing. And if you watch that recap that I talked about with Tyler Mannion, that was like one of his biggest points of criticism with Michael Krizo, and I think that's kind of been the fans' biggest criticism of Krizo as well, is the posing. And I think he really wants to take some time to go back to the drawing board and really try to fix that before he steps on stage again in Prague, and certainly before he steps on stage at the Olympia. I was kind of thinking that, Krizo would probably jump in. There's a big handful of European shows between now and the Olympia where he could qualify if he wanted to. And I was kind of thinking that was going to be his game plan, was to, pick one of these shows over the summer and potentially win one of those to qualify for 2025. But again, it looks like he's sitting out the 2025 Mr. Olympia and has his sights set on Prague, and then likely, if he wins Prague, 2026. So Michael Krizo will not be in the Olympia conversation this year at least. And I'm a little bit disappointed about that. I thought Michael Krizo had some pretty good looks here, even though he wasn't top 2 or in the conversation to win any of these shows. They were pretty competitive lineups, but I thought he brought some pretty good packages here, and he'd probably still be a top 10 Olympian if he were able to qualify. And let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, your predictions for the Cali Pro this weekend. Now, next up in the news, some recent physique updates from Nick Walker, where Nick looks really impressive. Obviously, he's shutting it down until the Olympia. That's his core focus. And of course, I've seen, there's been a little bit more Bob Ciccarello comments about Nick that have been really, kind of surfacing and becoming a topic of conversation here recently. And honestly, I think really what it comes down to, I'm not going to go super deep into this because I think we've kind of beat this topic to death. We've already talked about Bob's comments about Nick before. And I do think at the end of the day, everybody is entitled to their opinion and entitled to be able to voice their opinion on bodybuilding because it's such an opinion-based sport. It's super subjective. And I'm not going to be the moral arbiter here of whether or not Bob has some sort of obligation to the Olympia to not speak out on bodybuilders, because I don't really know how directly intertwined Bob actually is with the Olympia besides just being the MC. I think it would be different for me, and I would care a lot more if Bob was actually in a position where he could impact the result of the show somehow. And I think that would be a bigger deal to me if he were saying Nick's never going to win the Olympia, and then he were also a judge. That would be a conflict for me. But I think, Bob saying he's amended his prediction now. I think he said he went from 8th to now he thinks Nick Walker will be 7th, but he still says Nick's never going to win the Olympia. And of course, a lot of fans took issue with that, and I think that's the right of the fans, to call him out and disagree and take issue with and clown on him for that, because it's their right to have their own opinion and voice that opinion as much as it is Bob's right to voice his. And I think it's okay to disagree with that. And at the end of the day, like I said, I think that the storylines in bodybuilding leading up to a show make the show 10 times, at least 10 times, more exciting. I mean, when you look at the Pittsburgh Pro, I think one of the aspects that made Nick's performance there such an impactful and entertaining moment, what made it such a good story, was the fact that Nick was an underdog. He overcame adversity, even though he didn't win that show, but he won New York. I think the storyline of him missing 2 Olympias and the storyline of, everybody counting him out, all the criticism, the Bob Ciccarello thing was also prior to Pittsburgh. That actually made the show itself more exciting. I think opinions and commentary and storylines in bodybuilding are very important, whether you agree or disagree with whatever the opinions are. I think those opinions and those analyses and those storylines existing actually benefit the sport. So when someone like Bob, that is in a position of power, or however you view him as far as a representative of the Olympia, says Nick will never win the Olympia, and Nick will be 7th or 8th at the Olympia, imagine if Nick won the Olympia, Bob's comments would make that a more exciting result. So when I think about what Bob is saying, and I think about the fact Bob can't impact the actual decision, is Bob actually doing any harm with his comments? I mean, Nick has said multiple times that these type of things really fuel him, and you can tell, Bob making that comment about Nick leading up to the Pittsburgh show might have been motivation for Nick to look as good as he looked in Pittsburgh, might have been motivation for Nick to win his 3rd New York Pro title. Now, I personally disagree with Bob. I don't think Nick, I would have a hard time thinking Nick would be outside of the top 6 at all at the Olympia. I think it's more likely he'll be in the top 3 than it is that he would be 7th. But again, I think that these type of things, I kind of view it through the lens of, okay, Bob is saying Nick will never win the Olympia. Bob is saying he's going to announce him in 7th or 8th place. Imagine if Nick wins the Olympia, how big of a story, how exciting that show, that result would be, especially because Bob will be the one that would have to announce him winning the show. And I think that actually benefits the sport. I think it benefits the Olympia. I think it benefits the fans. I think it benefits Nick. I think it makes it way more exciting. And again, I think the moral arbitration of what responsibility does Bob have on behalf of the Olympia to not make these comments, I think that's a different conversation. But I still personally, it doesn't make me mad to see these comments from Bob. And I think it would be different if Bob were a judge, if he were the owner of the Olympia, if he were the promoter of the Olympia. Those things I think would be perceived differently than just him being the MC. But again, I think it is an interesting discussion that I want you guys to have in the comments below, because I'm not going to arbitrate this. I think your guys' opinion is more valuable than mine on this, because I voiced my opinion on everything, obviously, so I'm not going to tell Bob he can't. But I think that the conversation of, in Bob's position as an MC at the Olympia, what do you think about him voicing these opinions on athletes? Specifically, like with Nick, where it seems to be specifically targeting Nick. Like he said that he doesn't. He said he doesn't have a problem with Nick and that he likes him. But it certainly does have that feel that he is repeatedly saying these things about Nick as if he has something against him. And so it's more of a discussion of, in Bob's position, is that appropriate? And I'll let you guys have that discussion in the comments below, because I don't want to spend too long on this in a video. I've seen, Brian Powers and Bob going back and forth, the director of the Arnold going back and forth with him, and all the comments and stuff. I don't want to spend too much time on it in this video, though. Now, the final story that I have for you guys today. Keone Pearson shared a very impressive physique update today. And the relevance of this physique update, Keone also did a couple of videos where he did clarify in pretty definite terms that he has no intention in the near future or this year to go to open bodybuilding. He said that his sole focus is the 212 Mr. Olympia. Now, I still have a hard time thinking that if he were invited to the 2026 Arnold Classic in open bodybuilding with that prize money, that he would turn it down. But I do understand Keone's rationale. In the videos that he posted, I mean, he said this is going to be, a process that takes time. I mean, you saw him next to Samson at the Pittsburgh Pro guest posing. And as much as I want to see Keone, and maybe a lot of his fans as well, want to see him on an open bodybuilding stage right now, Keone is right that it's going to take time for him to add the size that he needs and to make the changes that he needs to switch to men's open bodybuilding. Like we saw it take time with Derek Lunsford. Even though with Derek, I think what Derek was able to do in such a short amount of time in his switch from 212 to open was honestly one of the wildest things I think I've ever seen in bodybuilding. It was like 6 months, and he came into the Open Olympia and placed second. And Keone would have a little bit shorter than that, but a similar amount of time between the Olympia and the Arnold 2026. And Derek kind of proved that it can be done in a short amount of time. But I do like that is Keone's main rationale for this, is that he wants to do this the right way and take time. It's not going to be an overnight thing. It's not going to be a this year thing. And that's probably the right approach. I just think that selfishly, I want to see him on an open bodybuilding stage ASAP. But I do think, seeing him next to Samson, it did become apparent Keone will need to add some size, without a doubt, for open bodybuilding if he does ever make that switch. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the video there. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the coverage of the Cali Pro. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about all these stories. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as always, I love you guys. Appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power signing out. All right, guys, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy the content. Also, check out my Instagram at Nick Strength Power. My Facebook page, which is simply Nick Strength and Power. My secondary YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Vlogs, for vlogs and bonus content that you will not see on this channel. And consider subscribing to my third YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Pokemon, which is all things Pokemon and trading card games, completely unrelated to this channel. So if you're into that, give that one a look. And all links to merchandise and social media will be in the description box below. If you guys want a Nick Strength and Power t-shirt, that will be in the Shopify link below. Have a great day.